You're listening to the Just Japan podcast. Everything you want to know about Japan.
Hey there, folks, and welcome to episode number 192 of the Just Japan podcast. My name's Kevin. I'm the host of this podcast about Japan, and you're wondering, hey, where the heck have you been so long? Hey guys, it is a pleasure to talk to you. It's been a very long time. Months and months and months and months. And again, I know a lot of you are saying, where have you been? Well, I've been in Beijing, China. I've been in Canada. Been around to a few places. But what I have been doing is not producing a podcast about Japan, and I do apologize. So here we are. Now I do have some good news. Well, this episode right now, it's going to be short. It's mostly about updates and something new. I've been working on a new project in my life that I want to share with you guys that I think some of you out there would be very interested in. It's about another podcast. Now, where have I been? I've been here in Beijing. I've been working. But I tell you, we're going to kind of backtrack a little bit into the fall. Earlier on in the fall, my family and I did have plans to travel to Japan for the winter holiday, the winter vacation. And we were going to be going to the Kansai area of Japan, of course, where my wife is from, where I lived for 10 years. We were going to be going to Kobe and Osaka. My wife's family lives in Osaka, so we had rented an Airbnb not far from where they live, just outside of Umeda in Osaka. And we had our tickets. We were going to go. Late in October, I was away presenting at a conference in Shenzhen, China. I was doing a presentation about outdoor learning when I got the news that my father had been admitted to the hospital. Quickly, things deteriorated. His condition deteriorated, and he was, put in intensive care. He was put on a ventilator to breathe for him, and we almost lost him. Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of details, but the thing that happened to him was bad luck. It was not a pre-existing condition. It was a type of bacterial infection that, unfortunately, he got by being in the wrong place at the wrong time. And it is now, fast forward, it's January the 20th, 2019. My father's still in hospital. It's a journey ahead of him. He has a long journey to recovery. But he's doing very well. He's essentially kind of like the miracle patient of the hospital, which is what a lot of doctors and nurses have referred to him as, because when he was first admitted to intensive care, no one thought he was going to live through the night. And that was months ago. And not only has he lived, but he's recovering so quickly, so well. I'm very proud of him. So what happened was I had to make a choice. Am I going to go to Japan with my family and enjoy a holiday, or am I going to do what a good son should do and go back home and spend time with his family? And that's what I chose to do the latter. I left work a few weeks early. I flew back to Canada in December, and I spent that time with my father every day in the hospital, and my mother, and being with family. And my wife and my children, they did go to Japan, and they had a wonderful time in Japan, which is what I wanted them to do, because I didn't want my kids to come to Canada and see their grandfather in the state he was in, the condition he was in. But also then that would have taken away my focus. I was there to focus on my father, my family, and to be honest, it wasn't a time to be a daddy to little kids, because that would have, kind of derailed the focus that I needed. They would have demanded focus from me when I really should be just focusing on my father, who needed, me there to be with him and family and support them. So now we're back in Beijing. I'm back in Beijing. My family's back in Beijing, wrapping up our final year of our 2-year contract. So what's been going on with the podcast? Well, the plan was, of course, to go to Japan for the holiday, and I would have created a lot of great Japan content, taken wonderful photos, fabulous photos, lots of food photos, travel photos, night photos. I would have made YouTube vlogging content. I would have had a Just Japan podcast meetup, all of those things. But because of the change in plans, none of that stuff happened. I will be in Japan in June with my family visiting for a few weeks, but so that's what happened with that. Now you're wondering, hey Kevin, where's the podcast been? Well, as I'm gearing up, I'm not gearing up. I've been for the last few months looking for work, and a lot of people are like, are you gonna go back to Japan? Well, that was an ideal thing. I would like to, but the job market in Japan is not a big one if you're an international school teacher. So just to clarify, I'm not an English teacher. I don't teach in Eikaiwa, or I'm not an ALT. I don't teach at private Japanese schools. I teach at large schools. I teach, I've taught British National Curriculum. I'm capable of teaching like American Common Core, International Baccalaureate, Primary Years Program. Currently, the context that I'm working in right now is I'm at a large international school right smack dab in the embassy district of Beijing, China, and a lot of the students who I teach are children of diplomats, children of people who work at large foreign companies that have a headquarters here, China headquarters, and Asian headquarters. Now the problem is in Japan, as the economy has contracted over the years of recession, a lot of large foreign companies that once upon a time had their Asian headquarters in Japan have moved on to places where they can get more tax incentives, tax-free zones, special economic zones. They've moved to places like Korea, Singapore, elsewhere. And with that change in the expat population, with a lot of those kind of wealthier expats who are in Japan on nice big corporate contracts, corporations that would pay for their apartments, pay for their children to go to nice international schools, a lot of those people aren't there anymore. So what's happened is that the numbers of students at international schools in Japan has fallen, and with that, there's less students. They mean they need less teachers, and a lot of people, a lot of very qualified teachers, want to live and work in Japan, which makes it much more competitive. So I attempted to get into a few schools. Things didn't work out this time around, so now I'm looking elsewhere in the world. But my family and I plan to leave China. Now, along with that, what has gone on is that I've been really focusing a lot on what I do. I'm a teacher, and I'll be a teacher until I retire. Um, and I've been working on a lot of professional development, focusing on my career as a teacher. And one thing that I decided last year that I wanted to do was develop an education teaching podcast. So I created a website, a blog last year, an education blog called makingbetterteachers.com, where I've blogged about teaching. And I started producing a podcast, or at least putting the idea together. And what I did is I interviewed a few different teachers I work with, a few colleagues, about some different topics of education and teaching. And then I took those interviews and I just sat on them for 6 months, 8 months. And then a few weeks ago, actually during the winter holiday, while I was sitting in Canada and had a lot of free time on my hands when I wasn't at the hospital with my father, to really kind of develop and plan this out more. And I put a lot of stuff on paper and notes on the computer about where I wanted the Making Better Teachers podcast to go. And I really looked at this as a tool to create professional development opportunities for teachers around the world out there, not just international school teachers, but teachers who may work in public schools or private schools in Canada, America, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, Europe, wherever it may be, and something for them. And something for me, to be honest, to market myself as a teacher and a professional and get people out there noticing me. Maybe someday I could be an education influencer. Who knows? So I put this podcast together and I've launched it this week. Actually, last week I launched it, and I put up the first 2 episodes at once. The 3rd episode came out today. It's a Sunday, and each Sunday a new episode will come out. We're coming up on the Chinese New Year holiday. That starts, my last day of school will be on February 1st, and then I have a 2-week holiday, which my family and I are having a staycation here in Beijing. We honestly can't afford to go anywhere after a very expensive winter holiday. And I'm going to put out probably a couple a week during that time period, just because I'll have the time. And I'm really wanting to push the growth of this new podcast. But I've got a new podcast, the Making Better Teachers podcast. Each week, a different teacher from somewhere in the world will come on, an educator, and talk about different aspects of being a teacher in the classroom, whether it's early years, elementary, middle school, high school, whether they're an administrator, a leader, a lot of inspirational stuff, tech stuff. There will be a few episodes where I do talk about teaching English in Korea, in China, in Japan, because, I'm going to be trying to cover all the gamuts of education. Can you say that? All the gamuts? I don't know. Is that a thing? Okay. But what I want to do today, guys, in this little update video, or it's not a video, podcast episode. I've told you guys a lot about what I've been up to. Is I wanted to add episode number 2 of the Making Better Teachers podcast right after I finish talking here. It's not a long podcast, but I wanted to throw it in there and for you guys out there to have a listen to it and see if you like what you hear. If you like what you hear, please go subscribe to it. It's on iTunes right now. It should be on Google Play and Spotify in the next couple of weeks. Do a search in your iTunes store or Apple Podcasts for Making Better Teachers podcast, or it's on SoundCloud too. Or you can just go to makingbetterteachers.com, check out you'll see the posts there, and all the links are there to the new podcast. If you like it, I would love it if you subscribed. If you just, if you're interested in the education thing, subscribe. If you just like to follow content that I produce, Kevin O'Shea, do that. If not, that's okay. I understand totally. If you're here for the Japan thing, I get why you're here. This may not be for you, but I'm just putting it out there. One thing I do want to share is that I did record a new episode of the Just Japan podcast with Jim Mullins, Molly, and Andrew Higgins just a few days ago. And I will be getting that up later on this week. And you'll listen to it and you're like, hey, these guys are just all sitting around catching up with each other. And that's exactly what we did. That was the whole purpose of the episode. They're still in Japan, I'm not, and we are catching up on things. And that was great. So that new episode of the Just Japan podcast will be coming up very soon. As for now, sit back and enjoy episode number 2 of the Making Better Teachers podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Making Better Teachers podcast. My name is Kevin O'Shea, and each week we'll bring you teachers from around the world. They'll talk about teaching, innovation, creativity, technology, conservation, classroom management, leadership, and a whole lot more. When you listen to the Making Better Teachers podcast, you'll become more excited about teaching. You'll become more knowledgeable and inspired. This is a podcast about teaching for teachers. Settle in, get comfortable, and get ready for this week's episode. Well, hello there, everyone, and welcome to episode number 2 of the Making Better Teachers podcast. It's January. It's cold outside. What better time to sit down in a nice warm place and listen to a new episode of the podcast? Well, this week we talk all about being a first-year teacher. And all of you out there listening, if you're a teacher, which I'm sure most of you are, you've all been there. We were all first-year teachers at one point, and we remember what that was like. I certainly do. It's an uphill, downhill roller coaster ride, and sometimes we get through that first year, and we're really thankful we do. But we take away a lot of different lessons from our first year in the classroom. Now, I sat down with teacher Greg Weiss, who's a Canadian who is based in Asia right now, teaching internationally, and he is working at an IB PYP school. So a primary years program school, which is very inquiry based, which for many teachers who are not right away, that on its own can be very daunting, even for experienced teachers. So Greg walked into a classroom, his first year as a teacher period, right out of university, and walked into a very inquiry based program, an international baccalaureate program. So I actually sat down with Greg last year while this podcast was still in development. So this is partway through his first year as a teacher. Right now, we zoom ahead to January 2019. Greg is partway through his second year as a homeroom teacher. Now, it was a really great interview. I'm really thankful that Greg sat down with us. And by the way, you can find Greg over on Twitter at The Weiss Perspective. So go check him out there. And, it was a really interesting interview. He talks about his experiences, and it'll be really cool. Maybe later on this year, we can sit down with him again and find out how things have progressed now that he's in his second year of teaching. So all of you out there, take a seat, relax, and listen to this interview with Greg Weiss all about being a first-year teacher. So this week's podcast, we're going to be talking about being a new teacher. And we've got right here a brand new teacher, Greg Weiss. Greg, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Kevin, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, so yeah, I'm excited too. So, once upon a time, I was a new teacher as well, and I can remember back to those days and how it was, how shall I say,
a very intense experience. So you are a first year teacher. And what I'm wondering right now, what are some of the biggest challenges that you've had this year, as well as some of the biggest rewards so far during your first year of teaching?
Well, I think in terms of challenges, the greatest challenge across the board really is finding balance. And I found that both in my personal life, in teaching, you can always be doing more and always be spending time looking at your computer, especially for us when we live next to the school. It's very hard to create separation.
Oh, yeah.
So just finding that balance in my personal life and school life
Mhm.
is a bit of a challenge. Not only that, but also in the classroom. When we talk about classroom management, coming in with these new ideas of inquiry and of it being very open and student centered. And I think, okay, I need to give the students sort of all the control.
Mhm.
But as times moved on, I've really realized, well, I need to rein things in
Yeah.
and find that balance of giving them opportunity and choice, and also ensuring that there's the right protocols and procedures and expectations set in place so that students can succeed, so that things aren't almost too student guided that they lose focus.
Yeah. So one thing I do want to mention, Greg is a grade two teacher. So your students are what, roughly 7 years old, 6, 7, 8 years old. So I think when you're an inquiry teacher, you really, especially new to inquiry, right? There's so much focus on letting the students take control, letting the students guide themselves. But sometimes when a child is 7 years old, giving them free reign isn't always the best idea, right? I
Yeah.
suppose you'll learn that yourself this year.
Yeah, going from, you think that this idea of open inquiry, just throw the kids into inquiry and they'll naturally do everything. And
Mm,
they'll, be engaged and excited about everything. But that's not always the case. You have to slow it down and do some guided inquiries. And sometimes you need to go back to that, what we call sort of the old school teaching,
mhm,
very teacher centered. But it's, again, finding that balance between
yeah.
open ended and student guided, and then finding meeting somewhere in the middle and giving the right steps and processes to
Mhm.
allow for the students.
Nice. So how now I'm curious about I know one thing that's a challenge even for someone who's been teaching for a long time when it comes to grading season,
Hmm.
report card season. How did you find that for the first time?
Well, I think the key for me in terms of being successful there is constantly just making little notes,
Okay.
and both mentally, and I use kind of a checklist every few days in each subject. Really, where are my students right now and where do they need to be? And
Mhm,
then building that into my lesson, how do I get them there? So, come report card season,
mhm.
the hardest thing is learning to use new report card software
Ah, yes.
more so than the writing in
Yeah.
it. I found our lead teachers gave us templates with ideas of sort of what it can look like,
Hmm.
and then I can use that and tweak that to my students to really meet their needs and to be able to express their learning and use real data
Mm.
to implement.
Nice, nice. So I'm curious, with regards to lesson planning this year, did you find it a bit overwhelming, especially in the beginning, your first month or so? Were planning your lessons? Were there some late nights for you?
I think for me, in terms of lesson planning, I always come in with these ideas and I have them really down, and the planning of the lesson is different to the execution of the lesson.
Okay.
So really getting that nitty-gritty detail into the lesson planning is something I'm still working on. I come in with a big overarching idea, but just need to work on finding clarity and making sure that all those little pieces, like I was saying in the classroom management, are
Yeah.
incorporated into it,
Okay. Yeah.
and being able to expect the unexpected, or being able to anticipate what is going to happen in the learning
Mm.
journey.
Yeah. So I mean, there's a lot of balls to juggle for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But and I guess we all face challenges. Even experienced teachers like myself, sometimes you never know what you're gonna deal with when you walk into the door in the morning in that classroom, right? But I'm curious, what have been some of the more rewarding aspects of your first year to this point?
I think the most rewarding thing is building the relationships with students and
Mhm.
seeing their growth and supporting them in their growth, not just academically,
Mhm.
but socially, and really just seeing children grow is it's amazing. I'm not a father or a parent or anything yet, but it's amazing to think the impact that you have on these students and the ways that you can help bring them to be an amazing young adult. And that's
Yeah.
really the
Oh,
I think.
absolutely. I mean, a lot of the kids that we do teach probably have a lot more contact with you than a parent.
Mm.
Yeah, especially in the situation where we are, where a lot of our students have drivers and housekeepers who take care of them and whatnot. Um, So, I mean, it's definitely rewarding too. I think, especially when you see how much the children like you and they want to be around you. Okay, so we're right now as we do this interview, we're kind of we've got a few months left in the school year. So you got a
Mhm.
few months left in your first school year. As you look forward to your second year of teaching, which will be coming up in August, is there anything you think you're going to do different? So, a different approach to things that, okay, I tried this during my first year and it didn't work so well, or maybe it did work well, but I want to tweak it a bit.
Yeah, certainly when you come in for the first time, everything feels overwhelming,
Hmm.
and you're just kind of doggy paddling, trying to get through it, trying to get through as much
Hmm.
as effectively and efficiently as you can. And you really focus on the big things, and you maybe get the big things right. But as you go through, you realize it's those small details that will make the difference. So maybe you want your students to be able to really engage in their reading and enjoy it and learn from it and grow from it.
Hmm.
And maybe it's okay, students are quietly reading during the time, but really breaking things down into the small details.
Okay.
So everything needs to be talked about.
Hmm.
And I think that I need to work on going back and talking about things ahead of time and in the middle and in the end, and always refocusing our attention. What are we focusing on? And really bringing students to that point of cognitively thinking about what they're doing and why they're doing it. Not
Hmm.
just doing it because Mr. Vice says this is time to read.
Yeah.
It's, I know I need to improve my reading. Mr. Vice has talked to me about these strategies. Today I'm going to focus on this strategy and talk about how we can do that and really setting procedures and expectations for the students. This is what reading is. This is what it looks like, sounds like, and feels like. And bring that looks like, sounds like, feels like into everything and reflecting on it and their
Nice.
own growth.
Yeah. It sounds like you have been doing a lot of reflecting so
Yeah.
far this year yourself, which is something that like we have to absolutely do as teachers, right? I think every year that I've been in the classroom, you'll get maybe one year there's a group of students that just have a really great energy and their behavior is just spot on, and it's a kind of a smooth sailing for that year. But then the next year you might get a whole new set of kids, and there's a personality conflict and there's other issues, and then all of a sudden you're kind of questioning yourself like, what's going on here? Last year it was so easy. This year it's really tough. So we got to do a lot of reflecting ourselves to become better teachers. Now, one last thing before we wrap up today, I'm curious if there's any new teachers out there listening, or people who are like say in teachers college and an education program somewhere getting ready to become teachers. What is one piece of advice that you would give to a teacher who is about to become that new teacher?
For me, it's don't compare yourself. You're going to be teaching with teachers who have a lot more experience from you than you, and they've been doing this a long time.
Mm,
And you think, okay, I want to be awesome in my classroom management. I want to be awesome in my lesson planning. I
mm,
want to be awesome in the clarity of how I'm providing information to students. But focus on one thing. Take one piece and say, this is what I'm going to focus on this year. Because you can't do it all.
yeah.
You got to know that you can't do it all. And there's people there who are willing and probably really excited to help you and watch you
Mhm.
grow.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, like when you see that again, like those veteran teachers you mentioned who seem to be great at everything, it took them a long time to get to where they are. And they know that they still can improve a lot. Well, Greg, thanks for coming on the podcast. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me, Kevin.
Now, I really want to thank Greg for coming on episode 2 of the Making Better Teachers podcast. And there's a few different things that he mentioned that I want to touch on a little bit more before saying goodbye. Now, first of all, I just want to mention that Greg and I are coworkers. We work together at the Canadian International School of Beijing. And so we've worked together. Last year we were on the same teaching team. Last year I was a grade 2 teacher, and we worked very closely together. Now, one thing he mentioned was balance, and that one of the struggles he had in his first year of teaching was finding a balance. And I think that's really key, no matter whether or not you're a first year teacher or a veteran teacher. Finding a balance, whether you have a family, a partner, your friends, your interests outside of school and work, hobbies. These are all very important things to maintain and make sure you have a healthy balance, because having those pursuits outside of school, your work, will make you a better teacher. Mentally, the knowledge you gain outside of the workplace, the happiness you gain from being with friends and family. Very key. Another thing that was mentioned in the podcast was reflection. And I think no matter where you are in your teaching career, reflection is key. Whether you're doing things that work well, it's good to be able to reflect on those and make note and say, hey, that worked really well. Let's try that again next year or later on in the school year. and then to look at the things that don't work well. And to be able to look at that and say, wait a second, I tried that, that did not work. And that's a process that's going to be ongoing throughout your teaching career. Reflection is key because you can make yourself a better teacher that way by reflecting on the things that didn't work. So guys, go follow Greg on Twitter and I made a mistake earlier in the podcast. It's at Vice Perspective. So VICE Perspective. Go check him out on Twitter, see the things he's doing. The concept of reflection and balance are great topics for an entire episode onto their own. So maybe something in the future, that's something we can look at in the future. And I just wanted to let you know that as I see right now, the schedule for the Making Better Teachers podcast will be on weekends. So either Saturday or Sunday, Beijing time. This is the time of the week where I have some free time. That's when new episodes of the Making Better Teachers podcast will drop. So you can always look forward to those on the weekend. Thank you for listening to the Making Better Teachers podcast. You can find out more about the podcast by checking out our blog over at makingbetterteachers.com. You can follow me, Kevin O'Shea, over on Twitter at MadForMaple. We are a new podcast, and you can help us get noticed and help us succeed in a few ways. First, you can head over to Apple Podcasts and leave a review and rating for us right now. Next, and most importantly, you can share us on your social media. I'm sure you follow teachers and other teachers follow you. Share this podcast on your Twitter feed, your Facebook, and any education-related Facebook groups you may be part of. Help us grow, and we'll be around for a long time. We'll see you again next week, folks, with a brand new episode of the Making Better Teachers podcast. Be happy, be healthy, and we'll chat again next week. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed that. If you did like it, go and subscribe to the new podcast, the Making Better Teachers podcast. All the links will be over at makingbetterteachers.com. We're on iTunes right now, Google Play, and Spotify to come. Remember, of course, you can find me on Twitter at JLandKev. I'm always very active on Twitter. Not JLandKev. Let's forget what I just said. Strike that from the record. You can find me on Twitter at MadForMaple. I'm very active on at MadForMaple. My old account, my JLandKev account, got locked by Twitter, and I've never been able to get back into it. So there you go. So that new Twitter feed at MadForMaple that has education stuff, teaching stuff, but it also has like travel stuff in Beijing. It's got food stuff. It's got a lot of Japan content that goes up there. Obviously, I've always got my foot in the door in Japan, having family from there. So check that out, guys. It's been awesome to talk to you. I hope you're all doing well. Thank you so much for the ongoing support. Make sure you check out all the links. Make sure you follow the Just Japan Stuff Facebook page. Check out my YouTube channel at BoosonKevin, youtube.com/BoosonKevin. And you guys are awesome. And go check out JustJapanStuff.com. All right, guys. Wherever you are in the world, I hope you're happy. Hope you're healthy. And I'll be talking to you real soon.
Bye.